Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode here on the Wandering Scribe and Wandering Quill podcast channel. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. Joining me today is a guest I am very excited to have on my show. My guest has loved history since her dad introduced her to pirates. When other kids went to Six Flags during summer breaks, she went on family vacations to museums and historical monuments. Teaching is her passion, and nothing brings her more joy than helping others find their love in history again. 4 years ago, she decided to turn her passion into a podcast and created For the Love of History, and now creates viral history content to share with the world. She lives in Japan with her husband and three history helper kitties. Joining us all the way from Japan is our guest today, Tehya Nakamura, also known as TK professionally on her podcast. TK, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me today, Gabriel. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, TK. You're welcome. I'm so excited to have you on the show. I've loved your content, especially when you have, I don't know if you had the name for this character, but she's the history receptionist. I
Yeah.
I honestly love that persona that you have for your content, which it's just so fun. It's so engaging. It's a very comical too, which I love that. I love to see that in history or other elements in history.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she does have a name. Her name is Sharon because she's sharing the facts. Um, very silly. I love a good pun. I love a good dad joke.
Nice, nice. So, give us a little bit more about your background, like how you got started into history, teaching, and then making the decision to move to Japan. I mean, tell us how it all went down.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with how I moved to Japan in the first place. So I went to school for history education, and my I had my first year of teaching as like a student teacher that turned into a long-term sub because the teacher who was my mentor teacher went on maternity leave, and it was like me and 120 little seventh graders.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, my new mentor teacher who had been teaching at that same school, I want to say for like 30 years, and he was retiring that year. And it was wonderful. I had a great time. I was a world history teacher. It was really fun. And they offered me the job to take the teacher who was retiring to take his position. And I was like, "Ooh, thank you. Let me think about it." Had like a little quarter life crisis, thinking about being in the same teaching position for 30 years, which is wonderful for some people. But to me, I was like 22 and I was like, 30 years, I can't even imagine this. And
Wow.
then I was Googling some late night Googling and was like, how to teach overseas. And I studied my area of interest was Japanese history in university. So I looked at teaching jobs in Japan and found a teaching job here and thought I would only be here for like a year, maybe two, and then 3 years, and then 4 years. And then I met my husband, and now it's been 8 years in July. It'll be 8 years this July.
Wow. Holy jeez. I mean, I can't even imagine that. I mean, my initial experience, like with that, something similar. I studied abroad in Chengdu, China
Oh,
during
cool.
my undergraduate, and that was my first time truly ever leaving the country. And I honestly fell in love with that. And I'm sure you could probably have this similar feelings coming over to Japan and just seeing like the history is just so
Oh my God,
rich. I
everywhere.
mean,
Yeah.
Chinese history for me, especially the Warring States period, is my
Mhm.
bread and butter. I
It's
honestly
good.
love that. If I had to have stayed there, I would have, but I had to go back. And
Yeah.
hopefully, it's a goal of mine to go back because one of my friends is a teacher, very much like yourself, who is teaching Chinese history to students in Shanghai. And
Whoa.
that is so much very fascinating. What I love with like historians because teaching history is a very fun experience, and kind of on
Yeah.
the same lines. So in the beginning, from your bio, your parents got you interested in history, but more so when it comes to schooling, who really helped you with that? Like looking history in the academic sense.
So in the academic sense, I had it, I got into history kind of late. In the academic, like in school. I had my junior year of high school. I took AP World History,
Right.
and my teacher was Mr. Hoffman. Shout out to Mr. Hoffman. And he was great. He was awesome. And I really started to enjoy history my junior year, so my second to last year of high school. For any non-Americans out there. And then I took him for AP, I think it was AP Anthropology, was the class. And I really love art. My second love is art. I'm not very good at it, but I like it. And we had to do kind of like a capstone type project in
Right.
AP Anthropology, right?
Hmm.
And so what I did was I painted a timeline from prehistory to, I can't remember where I stopped, wherever it stopped in the
Wow.
textbook. And I did a timeline all around the top of the classroom. So I did like, I forget the names, but those really, well, what we thought were the earliest cave paintings back
Right.
then, those hand prints. I did, Neolithic drawings. Then we talked about different, like the Jomon period in Japan. So I drew those little
Ooh.
Jomon characters and stuff like that. So
Right.
yeah, Mr. Hoffman was definitely the first catalyst in school of my love for history. But I cannot ignore the man who really, really got me into history, like in the academic world, is Dr. Woods, my university professor. I
All
remember
right.
the class. I started university wanting to be a nurse. Um,
Okay.
and then realized that I don't like needles and blood. And I had my human anatomy class, and I realized this was not for me because I was failing and I hated it.
Right.
And then immediately afterwards, I had my, I believe it was Introduction into Southeast Asian History or East Asian. Yeah,
Ooh. All right.
Introduction into East Asian History is what it was. And I walked into the classroom, and Dr. Woods had this giant projector picture of Tokugawa Ieyasu. And I was like, ooh, who's this man in this very fancy robe?
Nice.
Yeah.
Man.
And then I just fell in love with history from there. Hmm.
Okay, you are probably the one person I will probably say mirror almost similar to me in the sense I also started history pretty late. I actually didn't want to go into
Really?
history. I wanted to be a graphics designer. I actually applied to
Oh.
Laguna College of Art and Design, and I wasn't a good drawer. I wasn't a good illustrator, and I got into history with my AP US history. My teacher, shout out to Mrs. Singleton at Newview, and yeah, that started from there. But even from then, I didn't get into history. I went into interdisciplinary studies, Asian studies for my bachelor's in university level. And then when I went into my master's program, then I got my degree in history, but I specialized in classical history, which is a huge shift. And that
Yeah.
stems from one professor I had, Professor Campbell, who is probably my favorite professor of all time now. He taught the Romans as it is, and I've never had a professor who said, the Romans did this, they did that. I'm going to talk about it the way it is. It's going to be uncomfortable, but it is really, really good. And it's just so fascinating that all these people it like inspired all of us to like pursue
Ah.
history, even if it wasn't our initial thing in the beginning. And then
Hmm.
kind of leading into that teaching and like telling history in our different medias, let's actually now talk about your podcast and see how that came about, and it is the desire you want to satisfy for your listeners. What do you want them to experience?
Oh my gosh. So I found, and still sometimes I find the history, you know, community, not the people necessarily, but just the content surrounding it to
Hmm.
be intimidating sometimes.
Yes.
Very intimidating. And for as a person who hasn't always been interested in history, I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I missed out on, and a lot
Right.
of stuff that I'm like, you know, I feel silly for asking. I felt silly for asking questions. Like, I don't really know all that much about King Henry VIII, and I don't
Right.
really know much about the War of the Roses, and I really couldn't tell you the order of presidents or something like that, but I
Hmm.
sure can tell you that that the dye color red used in Japanese ukiyo-e comes from a beetle off of a cactus in Mexico. Like, that's weird, right? So,
Okay.
like, that's my bread and butter, And so for me, the the gap that I think I'm filling, that I hope I'm filling, is a place for people to get started and to not feel
Right.
intimidated. Not to feel dumb when asking questions, because things are hard. Sometimes even
Hmm.
now, I'm like, wait, 14th century. Okay, what does that mean? 1300s. Okay, I have to like think about it in my head. And I
Yeah.
never want anybody to leave my podcast being like, ooh, I didn't understand this part, or I didn't understand what this word meant, or the context of this. So
Right.
that, that's my desire. I really hope that I'm satisfying that niche of the bridge between like history beginner and history buff.
I have to agree, and I definitely think the history content on like Spotify and YouTube, it's very very niche depending on what area of history you're studying, whether it's military history, alternate history, and a lot of research goes in. And yeah, to your point, it is a little intimidating for someone who's never really studied history, but they want to see, oh, this video looks interesting. You don't
Mhm.
want to scare them with a lot of information that's going to like take them out of it. You want to gradually introduce them to the topic. And I definitely think that is probably the most difficult thing, because when we're academically taught to speak history in a certain way, we often
Mhm.
realize not everyone talks like us. We use words that the average person would not use. We use dates, different types of dates, words for
Mhm.
different dates or years. And that could be like,
Mhm.
what the heck? And then we have to
Yeah.
attach like a works cited page at the bottom of the
Right.
episode. So
I
I
chose
completely
to use
agree.
this date because
But it is very fascinating. But I definitely think there is the joy in teaching history. And probably one of my favorite quotes from a professor I had on my show not too long ago, who has her own podcast. She said, teaching history is like taking a baseball bat and swinging it to someone's face. It's going to hurt. They're going to feel pain, but you're going to learn something new.
yeah, well, I mean, she's not wrong. So
No, no, she is not. And then, kind of still in the same topic, um, as a result of your videos and the content, and you may have already answered this, what is something you want people to gain in the sense of like a promise that you're making to them, which I don't think is very important. Whatever content we make and whatever platform we set ourselves on, we are creating a brand. We are saying, this is who we are. This is what we create. This is my promise to you if you watch my videos.
Mhm.
So, what is sort of like the promise you're making to them? And do you hope that that promise will be received by people who watch or listen to your videos?
Yeah, I guess the promise that I'm making is like, you're going to laugh, you're going to learn. Sometimes you're going to feel a little uncomfortable, but you're never going to feel alone after you finish an episode. You're never going
Right.
to feel hopeless hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
after an episode, even, we talk about really funny stuff on For the Love of History. Like, we talk about the god Sobek, who created the Nile River from his sweat, which is gross and objectionably hilarious. That's hilarious. That's a
Yes.
hilarious thing. And then we also talk about the teenage Okinawan cave nurses that were
Mm-hmm.
in World War II. So we talk about a wide range, a wide emotional range of topics. But I never want to leave people feeling like, oh God, history is just awful. It is,
Mm-hmm.
but there's not just awful things. So
Right.
maybe my history bat is more of like a wiffle ball bat and not it's like it's gonna sting a little bit, but it's gonna be okay. Like we're gonna be okay. So I guess that's my promise.
Nice. And I honestly love that because you're right. It's true. History is not pretty. There are some
Mm.
good things. There are some horrible things. There are some comical things, like the great maple syrup train accident in Canada.
Yeah.
Like stuff like that. That is funny. And I never knew about that till I looked on a video about a guy. I think it's like Max Tasting History, and he makes
Mhm.
dishes from historical sources, and I
Yeah,
love that. And
love
that
that guy.
does teach.
Mhm.
And ultimately, that's what we're all trying to do. We are trying to teach and inspire the next generation of history buffs and
Yeah.
history nerds. And
Yeah.
kind of along those same lines, when you began your podcast, when you made the decision that this is something that you're going to do, what was the initial feedback like?
The initial feedback, um, I guess there's like two kinds of feedback that I had. So my feedback from like the people around me, my mom and my husband are like totally down for whatever I want to do. They're like, yes, they're always going to be the first people who listen to the episode, buy the merch, promote my Instagram, things like that. There, you know how Instagram
Right.
gives you like the this day 4 years ago or whatever.
Yes, yes.
So my husband saw one just the other day on his Instagram, and it was when he promoted my Instagram page right when it came out, and I had like 70 followers. 70. Just like double digits, and that's it. And their reaction was very, very positive, and it was really, really great. And then the listeners, I think I've also had a positive reaction, because I think there are so many people who are doing really great things with Tudor history,
Yes.
Victorian history. There's people, doing fantastic things, with royalty history, Queen's history,
Hmm.
just so many cool, 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 cool podcasts out there. And there's always going to be a niche to fill, always. No
Yes.
matter how many podcasts are out there,
Hmm.
there's always going to be a niche that needs filling. So I think my podcast kind of scratched an itch that some people knew that they had, and other people were like, I didn't realize that I needed this type of history in my life. So it's been positive. It's been very positive.
That's awesome. That is really cool. And I completely kind of understand like where you're coming from when like just starting out. You may not know this, but my YouTube channel wasn't actually the beginning. I actually started probably maybe 2 years ago. For listeners who have
Mhm.
followed me, and viewers who are now seeing this for the first time, I started my podcast on Anchor when I was interviewing indie authors with my friends. And
Uh-huh.
then that just sort of spiraled into the second season, which I now started getting historians from LinkedIn of all places. And that's where I've met a lot
So
of great
random.
connections. And then season 3 is up. Then season 4 is now in the works right now.
Mhm.
And then just last year, I began my YouTube channel. And right now, before this episode airs today, when it's finished, listeners, this will be 74 videos. 74
Wow.
videos in less than a year. And I didn't think I would get a lot of people to enjoy the content, like the wide range of guests that I've had, from people who have studied the Holocaust, people who have studied Tudor history, Roman history, everything. It's just so fascinating because, as you said, there's a niche for everybody. There's so many different podcasts. There's so many different historians with so many different backgrounds. And their
Mhm.
approach to history is always very fascinating to me because I love learning about people and just love learning from them.
Yeah,
And
me too.
thanks. And kind of going back to your promise, when you saw those followers and now seeing where you're at right now in your life, do you feel that your promise, your initial promise in the beginning, has been validated?
I think so. I think so. I mean, not to like toot my own horn, but I I like the way that I present history, and I think other people like it as well. And I have, it's so silly. I have this folder called the anti-imposter syndrome folder on
Ooh, okay.
on my phone. Um, and I take screenshots of things that people say, or messages that people send me. And I put them in this little folder when I feel like I'm just screaming into the void, when I feel like I'm not making progress, I'm not where I want to be, when,
Right.
comparison starts to creep in. And then I go and I read these little things. Maybe it's narcissism. I'm not really sure. I don't think it is, but I read it and I feel like, okay, like there's these people out here
Mm,
that have gone back to university to study history, or share these stories with their kids, or they listen to For the Love of History on their morning commute, or if they listen to a history hotline reel, they like share that fact at a party with a friend, and it helped break the ice or something like that.
right.
So those messages are like what keeps me going, and I think, you know lead me to believe that I have fulfilled my promise, or I am in the process of fulfilling my promise.
Awesome. Beautifully spoken. Because as I've always said, podcasting, content creating, and like writing a book, it's a very lonely experience because you're
Oh
dedicating
my
so much time and you're really trying to pump out something that you genuinely love. And nine
yeah.
times out of 10, it's not going to be well received by everyone. No one's probably going to like it. And the harsh reality is you may have those moments where you're having like burnouts and
Yep.
it's really, really sad. So, kind of
Mm.
leading into that, have you ever had those moments of like the imposter syndrome and just like days where you're just like, what am I doing? And what
Yeah.
sort of keeps you going? Because I think that's also important to like, what motivates you to continue making your content?
Yeah. Yesterday I actually had that moment of
Oh, okay.
I so I'm brand new at the whole YouTube thing, and I'm trying to branch out into
Right.
different forms of content. And the new Shogun series just came out, and
Yes.
I love Japanese history. And I was trying to make a reaction video, and I was like, reaction videos are easy. It's going to be so easy. It's just
Oh
me watching
no,
the
I
thing
can
and
already feel it
reacting.
right now.
It's not easy. And yesterday I spent 8 hours from
Oh no.
morning. Like I was eating lunch while editing. I like it just editing takes so long, at least for me, because I'm very new. And then my computer crashes. And I'm
Oh
like,
no.
what the heck? And I'm like, don't panic, don't panic, don't panic, don't panic. This is fine. This is fine. This is fine. And then I immediately start crying. Just
Oh no.
and so my husband comes home and he's like, what is happening? Because I'm just fully sobbing, like mascara down my face in
Oh
front of the computer.
no.
Yeah. And he's like, okay, we're just gonna move away from the computer. I took a little bit of a break. I my husband is an kickboxer. So I was like punching our little punching pads with him. And then I came back and I like found out, oh, some genius at Adobe has this like created this feature and it auto saves everything after 15 minutes. Like every 15 minutes it auto saves.
Okay.
So just so you know, anybody out there, if you use Adobe Premiere Pro and your things shut down unexpectedly, you only lost 15 minutes of work. So it's fine.
Oh my gosh. See, that's just like
Yeah.
me when I like before the interview when I told you that I
Mhm.
lost 40 minutes of footage. I was so mad. That's never
Right?
happened to me before.
Oh my
And it's like
God.
I've never had this happen. And I've been doing this
Mm.
for like a long time. It's like I should know this. And the record button didn't stop. I couldn't stop recording. It kept going. So it's like I'll hang up
Yeah.
the call. And it didn't record. I lost all that footage. And it made me so mad.
Right?
But then, like you, I stepped away. I read my book.
Mm-hmm.
I did my routine, and it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll just reschedule. Everything's
Mm-hmm.
good. I'm in my happy place.
Right? Right. And I think that's the most important thing for burnout is like, especially I have ADHD. So I get like, my brain is just, you know,
Right.
an ADHD brain. And so sometimes I'll get so hyper focused on something that I'll burn out faster. And
Right.
so just like taking that time to step back and realize, I don't know if this is a good thing to think about or a bad thing to think about, but it's what I think about. I, anytime I'm like spiraling into the burnout, I think
Right.
about, okay, if the zombie apocalypse came tomorrow, would any of this matter? No, it's fine. It's fine. If somehow the entirety of the internet just stopped working, am I gonna die? Probably not. This is gonna be fine. In
Right.
the grand scheme of things, when I look back at my life, is this going to be a net positive or a net negative moment? And that's
Mm.
what I try to think about. And I I try to say positive things, but like in a pessimistic way. Like,
Ooh,
wow,
okay.
I really learned a great lesson today. Things
Oh my
like that
gosh.
help me.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And sometimes you do need to take a lap now and then. And honestly,
Yeah.
I completely agree. And
Mhm.
now, probably one of my favorite questions
Yeah.
is one of my favorite questions is for you, TK.
Mhm.
Who is your role model in the sense of presenting history?
Oh my gosh. I love Philomena Kunk. I love her so much. I don't know if you know who she is, but she's the lady, I think she's on BBC. I've only ever watched her on YouTube because I don't live in England.
Wait, is she the individual and she does like a mockumentary, documentary kind of
Yes.
thing? I knew
Yes.
it.
I love her so much. And she does crazy things like I think there was this one interview that she did with the Roman or no, I can't even remember. Somebody who was an expert in Julius Caesar.
Right.
And she was like, "Why do you think he named himself after that salad?" Like it just dumb, dumb stuff. Like, why do you think
If that were
Caesar
me, I
named
was
himself
like,
after the salad? And the historian was like, "What are you talking about?"
oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
he's so funny. So like I try to channel her like unseriousness sometimes. Um and that's like my, well-known role model. But then my other
Right.
role model is Dr. Woods, my university professor.
Okay.
Dr. Woods is a fantastic historian. He's written so many incredible books and he comes back and forth to Japan all the time. And I don't know if he does it anymore or if he's retired. Like the way that he explains history, I think really keeps the humanity in history.
Right.
I think often things are like too analytical.
Mm-hmm.
Analytical is very important. We need to analyze things from an objective, a non-biased perspective.
Right.
But at the same time, I think there's also a place for putting the human story back into history.
Right.
And that's what I think he is so talented at. He's very good at having both the critical eye for history and also the human eye for history.
I absolutely agree. I actually touched on a really interesting point that I always like discussing with my guests is the
Mhm.
human side of history. As I'm sure you've probably been taught just as much
Mhm.
as I have growing up, learning history, we've been taught it's dates, it's years, it's very few historical people, maybe a name or two, and it's just
Mhm.
drilled into us. But
Yeah.
when we go into college, it's not like that. We look at,
Mhm.
again, the analytical, the research side, but also the human side,
Mhm.
the human stories, which are also important. And those do
So
kind of
important.
get overlooked. And it's really, really unfortunate that that always happens. And
Mhm.
kind of not much of a little mini rant, but I think now more than ever with the media and like presenting historical content, more than ever it's presenting like accurate historical content because I'm sure you may have seen either on Instagram or other forms of media. It's like, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. But they get
Mhm.
these audience members who don't know history and they think that that's true. And
Yeah.
then, kind of leading into this question, I think it's another important one, which you mentioned earlier that your content is made for the history beginner and the history buff.
Mhm.
Who would you say you also teach for? And I use this question in a sense is that if you were in the opposite position, if you were a person who saw this content, you would be like, this is something that I wish that I was watching. Is that how kind of like you also approach your content that you make? That this is something that you wish you had growing up?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. I wish that there would have, in my high school years there were teachers that didn't make fun of me for asking questions, but I just really wish that there had been some teacher that was like, yeah, ask the question, that's not a dumb question, you know ask away. I think it's important. So that's always how I try to approach my teaching of history,
Right.
is never to assume anybody knows anything, because not in the way of like, oh, my audience is dumb, absolutely not in
Mm,
that way at all. I just think everybody has a different, you know catalog of knowledge, and
right.
my catalog of knowledge and your catalog of knowledge might not be the same catalogs of knowledge. There might be some crossover, but I think it's
Definitely.
important to approach topics in in a way that is like not, what is that word even, exclusionary, I guess.
Right.
Just assuming somebody knows exactly what the Edo period is and then continuing the conversation. Be like, yeah, in the Edo period, blah, 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 blah. And then having somebody be like, what the heck is the Edo period? Like, I have no idea what this means. So just a very brief explanation after saying something, not in a condescending way, is always how I try to teach.
And I think that that is very beautiful. I had a lot of guests that have had the very similar mindset where, again, go back to my original statement is that when for us historians, we speak in a different dialect than than the average people. Like we are taught to speak in this way on this topic. We look at history in like the behind the scenes, and while we
Mhm.
like to talk and present history, we also have to realize no one's going to understand what we're talking about unless we have a brief explanation. I can tell that also from experience times with my friends and family when I say, "Oh, tell me about this history," and then I unload a wave of just information because I just can't stop. I think that's
Yeah.
also kind of one of the downsides of being a historian is that you don't know when to stop. You just keep
Never.
teaching, even though
Keep
you're
going.
not doing it anymore.
Right. Exactly.
Nice. And kind of on the same lines of teaching, would you say that your professors have also um, played a big role in like your method of teaching history, not just for the podcast, but also for your students as well? I think that's also important to talk about as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. The thing with classroom teaching that is so interesting is that each classroom that you have is going to be filled with different kinds of kids.
Right.
You know, you're going to have, or different kinds of people in general. Not my
Right.
experiences with kids, but people in general. So you're going to have different types of people in a classroom anytime your classroom changes. So I think finding the thing that sparks interest, and then using that as like a wedge to open
Yes.
up the topic, I think is the most important part. Like when I was a fourth grade teacher and I was teaching my students about we were doing a unit on Egypt,
Hmm.
and they were all science kids. They love science. They love simple machines. They love building robots. So the way that I started the unit is talking about simple machines and how the Egyptians used the pulley, the, whatever, the wedge, all of those
Right.
simple machines, the screw, you know.
Hmm.
So I approached it from that side first to get them interested. And then we went into the history and the culture and the religion and the mythology. So I think taking into consideration your audience is always important, and that's what my professors and my teachers have always done. And my dad, he was like, "This, I want her to like history. She doesn't like my war history, but he might like pirates," and that's how that's
Nice.
how we got me.
That's actually like so cool because yeah, it is true. History always has caveats to other things, whether it's
Mhm.
science, medicine,
Yep.
technology. It is really
Mhm.
fascinating. And I remember one of my students that, for those who may not remember, I'm also a tutor as well.
Mhm.
I remember teaching one of my students on the Mughal dynasty of India. And that's a
Mhm.
period that not a lot of people know about, but it's so fascinating to show that and really opens their eyes. Even talking about American history that people may not know about, it is incredible. And
Yeah.
this kind of sparks another question, which I want to ask you,
Mhm.
because I remember one of my friends brought this up, and it is a really important discussion, which is when you came to Japan and you started teaching, did you ever have almost like a sense of like going back to the sense of imposter syndrome, where it's like, um, a foreigner in the sense, for like the average person, foreign teaching the history of people who are living in that country? And my friend brought that up because when she started teaching Chinese history in
Yeah.
Shanghai, she had that reflection. It's like, do I really feel like an extra because I'm the foreigner here? I'm the outsider and
Mhm.
I'm teaching them their own history. And that will kind of be in a sense of, am I actually doing something right? And I'm wondering if you ever had that experience, or if you didn't, um, what did you have something similar, or did you have something similar?
Yeah, that is such a good thing to think about. And the way I think about it is like, you, granted, most American teachers are from, from America,
Right,
who are teaching history, right?
right,
Whether they're like American, whatever ethnicity, American Chinese, American Bengali, like American, whatever, you
right.
know, there's such a mix of people in the United States, and not everybody knows everything about the country that they live in. I think perspective is important
Mm-hmm.
when teaching history. So the perspective of someone from, you know, an immigrant coming to the United States, learning American history and then teaching it to somebody else. Someone who was born and raised in Nebraska, learning
Right,
history and teaching it to somebody else. Somebody who is, coming from a different country to another country, learning the history and then teaching it to somebody else. I think that those perspectives are really important, but I think there is a fine line between teaching from your perspective and teaching from your bias.
Yes.
So, yeah, teaching from your perspective, great, love it, awesome. Teaching from your bias can be fine, can be comical, but I don't think it has its place in an academic setting, like
No.
teaching students, we all have inherent bias, so it's
Right.
impossible to take it out 100%. But if you come from like a position of like, I know everything, you are the student, I'm going to teach you everything that you need to know about your own country, that's not good. You
Right.
shouldn't do that. But
Hmm.
coming from it as a place of like, hey, this is my perspective of what I have gotten from learning this history. It is your history, but this is what I have learned. This is how I'm going to present it to you. I think they're two separate things. If does that make sense? I'm sorry if
Yeah,
that
no,
answered.
no, that's actually perfect. And I think that's a really
Okay.
big, important thing, especially as content creators, historian content creators, because that
Mhm,
is a huge thing. Like teaching from our perspective of our backgrounds that we specialize
mhm,
in, and teaching on a sense like a bias. And you're 100% correct. Sometimes our biases are going to come out now and then naturally. But if you make the commitment to actually teach from the bias, then I'm sorry.
mhm.
You're not teaching history. You're teaching fiction. You're teaching a warped version of history that does a disservice to the history and does a service to you as an historian, because you were trained to think critical, think analytical, and look at the data. And if
Yeah.
you aren't doing that, then I'm sorry, you're not an historian. You're just made
Mhm,
fiction. And I definitely think now more than ever, it is important to teach history from a non-biased perspective at
mm,
the very least. Again, biases will always come out, but if you're always willing to learn from a different perspective, they're going to be fine. Because at the end of the day, history has many different perspectives. Like, okay, in the case, for example, Japan. Many people, especially in America, when you think of Japanese history, they most likely think of the Sengoku period,
mm,
the Meiji Restoration, and more
mhm.
than not, World War II.
World War II,
But if
always.
yes, but if you look beyond the Sengoku period and
Mhm,
like the Kamakura period, I mean, that era of Japanese history is so
mhm.
fascinating. I mean, many people may not even know that the Mongols tried to invade not once, but twice.
What?
Granted, weather was against them, but that could
Right?
have been huge. No one probably even knows that Japan invaded Korea twice,
Yeah.
which destabilized the Korean kingdoms and changed
Mhm,
Chinese history because the Ming Dynasty went bankrupt, allowing
mhm,
the Manchurians to take over and also putting Japan in another period of civil war for a brief period of time until
mhm.
Ieyasu Tokugawa assumed the mantle of shogun and established the Tokugawa shogunate. No one
Yeah.
knows of that.
Nobody. Yeah.
Mm.
And there's so many other cool parts of history, and I want to kind of bounce off of that idea and diverge our conversation for a second. I think especially for a lot of history that comes from um like languages that are not widely spoken, like not
Yes.
saying that Japanese isn't a widely spoken language, but there's not a lot of historians in Japan that also speak English. um
Right.
and there's not a lot of Japanese history books written by Japanese people that are then translated into English.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so disseminating that information is really difficult. Getting
Hmm.
information on these more niche topics, it can be so difficult if you don't speak the language. So I think that it's great to have people who do speak the language, who are willing to learn in as much of an unbiased way as possible, and then go back to their mother language, whether it's English or French or whatever, and then teach that information that they learned.
Definitely, definitely, 100%. I agree with that completely. And we're just nearing the end of the interview, so I'm going to ask you the last few questions, TK.
Yeah.
So this is probably one of the biggest nearing the end, which is looking back where your life is right now. Have you ever thought to yourself, how different would my life be if I wasn't doing the podcast and I was solely dedicating my life to being a teacher? How different would your life be?
So different. Well, first of all, I wouldn't be talking to you,
Maybe.
which would be so sad. Um, and gosh, how would my life be different? I would have more time to crochet. Just joking. I don't know. I would have less knowledge in my brain. I would have less information about the world. I wouldn't have a creative outlet, because I think that content creation in every form is creativity.
Mhm.
And being an adult and having a creative outlet is so great. It's such
Yes.
a privilege. And I'm thankful every single day that there are people out there that
Mhm.
want to hear what I have to say, want to hear these stories, and that I have this creative outlet um to spread these kinds of
Right.
stories. So incredibly grateful for the people that I have met, for the people who have sent me messages, all of the little delicious donuts. That's what I call my listeners. I'm so grateful for them. And I don't think my life would be as like, full
Right.
without this. It would have been great and fine. And, I've got my friends and my family, but this just adds another layer of community, I think, that I'm really grateful for. And I'm so happy that I'm able to do this, and that, there's other little history BFFs out there that also get something out of it. And
Right.
yeah, I can't imagine my life without For the Love of History.
Nice. And kind of leading on to what you said about the messages from followers and friends,
Mhm.
have you ever gotten a sense of validation from fellow historian content creators or fellow historians that you may have met on Instagram or other social media who have seen your content and have said, this is where you belong? Because I ultimately think that is truly important, even like in any field. Like when you enter a
Yeah.
field in like history, science, mathematics, or anything, it's one thing
Mhm.
to have the knowledge. It's one thing to do the work. It's another thing when someone recognizes you and like says, you did all right. This is where you belong. And sometimes I've met people who have said, it's incredible, a sense of validation. But then sometimes they've also said that they didn't start this for validation as like their main goal. It just came naturally. So how was it for you, TK? Have you had that sense of validation from fellow historians, or have you not gotten that yet as like the primary goal?
I mean, that's not my primary goal for sure, but it does feel good. I'd be lying if
Yes.
I didn't say that validation feels nice. It does. My
Yes.
my little dopamine lacking brain loves validation. Oh my
Mm,
gosh. But I don't do it for the validation.
right.
But there have been, people that I've met, other content creators, like the person that comes to my brain like right off the bat, who has just like another podcaster too, who have like always been in my corner, who have always been so kind online. um Laura from Hightailing History, and
Okay.
Destiny from Closeted History. They are two
Oh,
podcasters
all
who
right.
I love so much, and they're so kind and sweet, and always like commenting on my stuff. We talk back and forth all the time, and they're really, really sweet. And then also Natalie and Gemma from If It Ain't Baroque podcast, which is hilarious, absolutely hilarious. So those are like the podcasters who I feel, the most, validation from. And then there's
Right.
been other podcasters who have helped me so much, like Katie from Queen's podcast, and from Vulgar History. Like they have really been so helpful to me in this journey, because they have incredible podcasts and very, very popular, and they're making careers out of it, which I'm trying to do,
Yes, same.
in my career. So they've given me a lot of help and
Mhm.
advice, which has been absolutely lovely. And then, just validation from listeners. I have some OG listeners who are like the first ones to always be like, yes, TK, get it. You're amazing. I'm here for whatever it is that you're doing. And I just appreciate those people so much. So if they listen to this, I'm sure they know who they are.
Awesome. And would you say that in addition to them and your family, they've been your biggest supporters and helpers on your journey?
Oh my gosh, yes, so much. Yeah, like I have one listener. I like to call she's my friend. She's just my friend now. And she, is always sending me ideas for episodes, like things that I can do for anniversary ideas, like community outreach ideas. I have another follower who she sends me birthday presents every year that are like
Oh, that's
historical
nice.
related. She's so sweet. And then I have another listener, who a little delicious donut, who has sent me books for research before. And then another one who is just a constant like ray of sunshine, who just anytime I post like anything slightly negative, she's like, you got it, you can do it. Like, I cannot even tell you how many times, you know, the history BFFs have just known somehow that I was having a hard
Right.
time and sent me a message and made me feel better. I
That's what I've
always
always
joke
been
that,
saying.
yeah, I always joke that I am the most emotional history podcaster. Like I've cried on my podcast before. I cry on Instagram all the time, like happy tears, sad tears, excited tears. So
Uh,
yeah.
but
Mhm.
as I said in the beginning, as historians, we all want to help each other. We are like a
Yeah.
tight knit community. We're a tight knit
Mhm.
family, and we're always learning from everyone. We may not have the same interests as our fellow historians. We may not agree with them sometimes, but we all come together to help people. And I think that leads into probably the most important question of the interview, TK, which is, what is your word of wisdom to upcoming historians who want to be content creators?
Just do it. Just turn on the camera and do it. If you want to be a content creator, the you are gonna just need to get over the cringe. Like, how stupid is it of me to sit in front of my computer with I think I have it right here, a little face razor that I use as a microphone to, here it is. This is what I use as a microphone for my stupid little history hotline videos. Like, what? That's ridiculous.
Oh, that was perfect. I needed that.
It's just so dumb. You got to get over the dumb. It's okay to look stupid, because even though you feel dumb, there's somebody out there that's going to love it. And you know what? If they don't, learn from it. It's not a personal attack. If, people don't like it, if you like it, do it, because there are going to be people who do enjoy your things. You just have to turn on the camera. Just turn on that camera and be willing for things to suck and then be willing for things to be great at the same time. And also remember that your self-worth is not attached to this in any way. In any way, shape, or form, your self-worth has nothing to do with the content that you create. It's separate. So, yeah, that's my biggest advice. Turn on the camera, upload that video. Do not attach your self-worth to the content that you create.
I like that you added that because I think that is so true. We tend to invest so much into our projects, whatever they are, and they seem to be reflective of who we are. But you're right. We have to separate ourselves. It's a project that we made. We made it. Not people are going to like it. Some people may, but it's not us. It's not a reflection of who we are as a person. And I think that's probably the most beautiful thing that I think we've had on the show. And with that, listeners, we conclude this wonderful, funny, all around wholesome interview on the channel. I want to extend a huge thank you to our guest, TK, for joining us and just allowing us a window into her life as a content creator, as a fellow historian, and overall a wonderful human being.
Oh, Gabriel, thank you. That's so kind of you to say.
You're absolutely welcome. Now, before we officially end, I'm going to pass it over to you, TK. Do you have any episodes, announcements that you would like the listeners to know?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say, Gabriel, thank you so much for having me on the podcast, asking such insightful questions. I'm usually on the other side, so I was very nervous coming into this interview, but you put me right at ease and asked such lovely questions. So thank you so much for having me and just
You're
being such a
welcome.
gracious host. I really appreciate that. And as for my content, I have a reaction series of the FX Shogun TV show that's coming out. So that is my latest project right now that I'm working on. You can find For the Love of History on YouTube, on all of the podcast platforms, on Instagram. I'm also on TikTok, but I don't know. TikTok doesn't like me. Instagram likes me, so I'm over there. We do monthly I call it History That Ate. So monthly live history cooking shows on YouTube.
All right.
Yeah. Last week we did Date Masamune, they call him the one-eyed dragon. He was also an incredible chef. So I made his miso soup. And this month we'll be having another one. You can find me on Patreon for lots of extra bonus content. And if there are any publishers out there who want an idea for a women's samurai history book, just contact me. That's my big goal for this year. So
Nice. Well, I will say this, listeners. Head on over to TK because I'm going to be linking all those down below. And TK, I'm so glad you brought up the book because I'm also a fellow author and I love writing about history. And in fact, I'm actually going to show you. I have it right here. I'm out of the screen, listeners. So sorry. I actually have a book, two of them. This one's called The Gathering. So think of Magnificent Seven meets Lord of the Rings, but they're transported to an alien world.
Wow, that's fun.
Yeah, and then the next one, which is the follow-up, is called Amanus, Son of Persia, which is an alternate world where Persia wins the Second Greco-Persian War, and this is under Persian rule, but now the main character has to go along an odyssey, which takes him to Carthage, North Africa, Syracuse, Thrace, and all the way back to the Babylonian Empire. And not Babylonian Empire, Persian Empire. Wrong dynasty.
It's okay.
I'll be linking those down below. And listeners, please also make sure to comment questions because I will be doing a Q&A at the very end, or at least towards the end of this month for the 1-year anniversary of both books. Well, specifically The Gathering. So make sure to comment down below. And again, thank you for joining us for this wonderful, funny interview. And again, thank you, TK, for joining us. And hopefully, when your book gets published, keep me updated. I'm going to have you back on the show for an author interview for you to showcase your work.
Thanks so much, Gabriel. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. And with that, listeners, I hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for more episodes coming up later in the weeks. And as always, this has been The Wandering Scribe and The Wandering Quill, signing out.